Hello, everyone, and welcome to our professional learning series. This is actually the last presentation of this school year. We've looked a lot at change and how that operates, and so this session is going to look at 3 surprises about change. We know a lot about change, we know it affects our lives, but we're not really sure sometimes how it operates, and all the recent research has given us some really interesting insights. So we're going to share today about the 3 surprises about change. As always, our mission and our vision are at the forefront of all we do. Our values lead how we operate and engage with one another. So we're going to look today specifically at 3 surprises, maybe things you've never even thought about, but has been well researched and demonstrated. We're going to explore how the divided brain can make change difficult. And I think you'll recognize how really divided our brains can be. You're going to identify your brain preference. And then we're going to look at a proven scientific method for a framework that will help you facilitate change in your own life. And then we're always open for you to reach back with questions and answers through our email if you have them when we're done. So we've talked about our values, and the challenge of change lives with us all the time. I mean, I began saying, 20 years ago, the only thing constant, change is the only constant. So as we deal with the reality of change in our lives, we tend to have a resistance or a kind of fundamental unwillingness to change. And one of the most fascinating books I've read in a long time is called Switch, How to Change When Things Are Hard. It's written by Chip and Dan Heath. These are brothers who do a lot of research on a variety of topics. And if you've never read them, it's a fascinating read. And they've pulled together a decade of research to talk to us about change and how to switch our positions when things are challenging. So let's start right off with the 3 surprises. So surprise number 1, based upon their research, is what looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. Think about that for a minute. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. And when it's a situation problem, here are their findings. In a situation problem, motivation didn't matter. Choice was irrelevant. The situation shapes the response. So let me share a research study. They collaborated with Cornell University, and they did a research study on they were looking at how people make irrational choices about food. And so they gathered a whole crowd together and they invited them to a showing of, it was Mel Gibson's Payback. Everybody came free. And when people came into the showing, they were given a drink and a container of popcorn. And everybody got popcorn, so there was no need to share. Now, the interesting thing about this popcorn was it was awful. It was awful popcorn. Purposely. It had been made 5 days before. It was stale. Post-survey, one of the participants said it was like eating styrofoam, but it was free. And when things are free, we tend to eat them whether they're terrific or not. So they launched this, they gave everybody popcorn, and they told people that they were going to talk with them about the snack bar at the end of the presentation. So people went off to the movie. Now, what was interesting about what they'd done with the popcorn is they had 2 sizes of container. They had a medium container and a large container. And they weighed exactly how much was in each container so that they could collate that data when they were done. And so people went off and they watched the movie, and they came back and they handed their popcorn containers back. And what they found were results that they viewed as stunning. Now, why were they stunning? Well, it turned out that 53% of the people with, all the people with large buckets ate 53% more popcorn than the people with smaller buckets, 53%. They dipped in their hands 21 more times they ate popcorn, and they added almost 200 calories more per each, right? Same popcorn, different size buckets. Right. And what they found when they went, and there are endless, they did endless of these studies. This was out of Cornell University. They did these popcorn studies over and over again. And the findings the final findings were that people ate popcorn according to the size bucket they were given. People who got the smaller bucket ate less. People who got the larger bucket ate more. And it didn't matter how you broke it up, what kind of people there were, what kind of groups there were. It was always the case. People with the larger buckets ate more than the people with the medium buckets who ate less. And so the finding was, if you want to control irrational eating, You could look at this and say, well, we need to find out why people eat and if they use, how they're motivated. The truth was, in this particular irrational eating experiment, they determined the outcome solely by the size of the bucket. And that was their situation. They shaped all their responses based upon the size of the bucket, and it held true. So if you wanted to manage irrational eating, it was by changing that shape of the bucket. And this is fascinating. It applies to other things in our life. It's the situation very often that shapes the response. And as we move through change, if we can adjust the situation, find out what's important about the situation, then we can adjust that to make ourselves more effective. Now, what they did find in their research was that if we're going to change anything, someone has to start behaving differently. All change boils down to, can you get people to start behaving in a new way? We have patterns here at Compass that we've had for 10 years. Can we, in our transition right now, begin to trust and change the way we behave based upon our situation that we're creating? And it's always the truth. The truth remains the same all the time. Change is about you and what you choose to do. So in every situation, still, now in that popcorn experiment, what's fascinating about it was people didn't believe it. They said, no, that the size of the bucket wouldn't affect me. I know when I've had too much, and I know, you can't trick me like that. But the truth of it was, the findings were always consistent. So they ask in the study, well, yes or no, do you think people resist change? So just throwing it out there to you right now, what do you think? Do you think people in general resist change? Well, I know I've heard for many years that people only change when it's absolutely necessary, and it's often almost always painful. Well, there is that kind of change. Do we resist it? Well, the findings are yes and no. I mean, yes, we tend to resist, but no, we don't. Think about, for example, having a baby. No, that's a decision that's going to radically change your life. But when people have decided and they make that decision, there isn't anything that they won't do to facilitate that situation. So there are lots of things. A new job, that's a change. That's a decision to make a change. So it turns out really that all of the findings were, yes, we do, and kind of no, we don't. It depends upon what the decision is, what the situation is. But all research says that successful changes share a common pattern. And that pattern is that you have to approach every change. And if you are in a situation where you're the leader has to present this to people. Or in your own life, you're your own leader. So if you're looking at change personally, you have to ask these things of yourself. So we know through research that changing a person's situation to shape success is important, and influencing the person's heart, influencing our heart so that we have passion and desire to get on board and facilitate the change. And I just want to talk very quickly, a quick review. We did change versus transition, before. We've looked at that before. And when we're managing change, remember, we have the major change plus we have the transitions. And as we're looking at this and how we manage change, we are responsible really for both the external. We may be choosing to make a change in our personal or professional life, or change can still happen to us. Still, as the leader guides us, the same strategic model works in the facilitation of change. So we know that the transition is internal and psychological, and that part of our brain we have to access in order to make sure change happens. And by increasing awareness and learning new things, we make that possible. But the challenge is, when faced with change, how do we implement the pattern? Should we do this new thing? Can we do it? Maybe different than should we do it? Or will I do it? We have all these questions. And here's the big thing. The heart and the mind disagree. The research, lots of research has identified, and this particularly, what we're going to talk about right now comes out of the Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. And if you haven't read that book, it's a wonderful read. And it identifies the divided mind. Now, research has identified the divided mind, but Haidt gave these descriptions to it, which have caught on and are used across the literature now. So essentially, the mind has two distinct sides. There's the emotional side, and Haidt decided to call it the elephant. And the elephant is instinctive. It feels both pleasure and pain. It's got a lot of emotion involved with it. And the rational side is the writer. And the writer he's reflective, conscious, deliberate, analyzes, looks at the future, has a more long-term view of the world. And essentially, the research has identified that we have, as human beings, a divided mind. We have both sides. We have the rational side and we have the emotional side, and they both kick in and play in the change process. Let me share a story about Clocky. Now, Clocky is an invention of a MIT student, and it demonstrates how the divided mind works. Clocky is an alarm clock on wheels, as you can see, and Clocky is designed to have the alarm clock set. And when your alarm goes off, Clocky rolls off the table and randomly rolls around the room, just everywhere. So this forces you to get up, get out of bed, and chase Clocky down in order to turn off the alarm. Well, obviously, the buttoning ourselves into disaster can happen on the snooze button. And so this was enough of a concern that this was a product that began to sell with little or no marketing. Clocky had sold, I don't know, what does my notes say, 35,000 units were purchased in the first 2 years at $50 a clock, because enough people were worried they would snooze button their way to disaster. Used a lot on the campuses, and Clocky's a reality. He lives, and he's a demonstration of our divided mind. I mean, and it shows fundamentally how schizophrenic we can be. I mean, if you think about it, our rational side sets the alarm and knows that we're going to get up in the morning and maybe go to the gym or do whatever we have to do. We set the alarm when we're ready to go. And our rational side, our rider, is making that decision and setting the alarm. But when that alarm goes off in the morning and there's a snooze button off, it's the elephant who wakes up. The elephant's warm and comfortable in the bed and doesn't want to get up and is tired and resists. And so it's an interesting way this alarm clock kind of helps the rational side of our mind trick the emotional side and make it get up and move so it participates in the decision. I get a big kick out of this because I think this could be a reality in a lot of households across the country. And again, Clocky shows us, just how divided our brain is as we move through life and how both of those sides are often challenged and struggling with each other. Now, the emotional elephant can be really lazy, a little bit skittish. The elephant's looking for a quick payoff, I mean, I'm going to buy the pills where I can lose 100 pounds. And I don't have to change anything that I do. I mean, that's an elephant buy, that's for sure. It seeks instant gratification, and yet the elephant is where our passion and our emotions, and there's extraordinary energy and power and enthusiasm that lives there. The elephant buy-in, as they found in all the research, is absolutely mandatory for change. Without the passion of the elephant, change is kind of destined to fail. And it's interesting, when you look at the elephant and we look at the rider tends to overanalyze and overthink. He gets so involved in the choices that he ends up spinning his wheels. Yet there's an absolutely mandatory place for the rider because he provides the necessary guidance and direction. The rider thinks long-term, beyond the present moment, and gathers our resources. Now, here's the thing. You put the rational rider on the elephant, the rider can hold you online for a while, but if the elephant isn't engaged and the elephant decides to sit down, there's not a whole lot the rider can do. That's why it's so important that these two parts of our brain actually work in tandem with each other. So both sides, the elephant and the rider, have incredible power, but have flaws that can be paralyzing. If a reluctant elephant and a wheel-spinning rider can both ensure nothing changes if they're working like that, if the elephant's sitting down and the rider's trying to force him forward and they're not in alignment, nothing changes. And I find this absolutely fascinating. If you reach the riders on your team and not the elephants, you've laid it all out, it's abundantly clear, but you haven't built passion around it, what you will have is understanding of the change without any motivation to complete it. If you reach the elephants in your group and you don't get to the riders, and the elephants are passionate and they want to move forward and they want to do it now and they want to get going, but the riders aren't on board, you create a team that has passion, but there's no direction. We have passion, we want to move, but we have no clear path for how to implement. But if you put the elephants and the riders together, get them on the same path, united in the same passion, there's no end to what the two can achieve together. So what I'd like to ask you to do right now is just think about, what are you? I mean, in terms of what we've learned, do you think you're an elephant or do you think you're a rider? Now, I know some people can say, well, it depends. And I think there's truth to that. I think it absolutely does depend. But we still also have a general tendency to be either the one who brings the excitement and motivation and courageous attitude to something, or the one who sits back and plans and lays it all out for other people to follow. So I'd like you to just take a second and pause the video and go ahead and take the poll, because we're interested to see how many elephants and how many riders we have. So go ahead and do that, and I'll be here when you get back. All right, we're glad that you posted that for us, because we're really kind of interested to see how many elephants and how many riders we think we have on our teams across the board. And now I also would like you to reflect on what that means, and reflect on, if you are an elephant, how does that impact how you engage? What do you need to engage in change? And if you're a rider, you have a great plan, but how can you get people engaged in the plan? And understand the strengths and weaknesses of both, and how it may impact what you do on a daily basis. So we're going to continue, and I'll be really interested to see what our results are in the poll. So we've done surprise number 1. Let's talk about surprise number 2. The research indicated, and this was, again, Chip and Dan Heath have kind of collated a lot of the research in the last decade, and they're doing a summation. There are sources within which I've identified for you. But the second surprise they found was what looks like laziness is often exhaustion. And they did a fascinating study, well, several studies, on the fatigue of self-supervision. And self-supervision is what we call willpower. That's, we're going to do this, we make up our minds to do it, and we're going to do it, we're going to make this happen. And when the rider and elephant disagree on whether they're going to move or they're not going to move, the rider can keep pushing with the reins on the elephant, trying to get the elephant to move. But the fundamental bottom line is, if the elephant doesn't move and sits down, the rider's stuck. The rider can't go anywhere. And so it has to have more than self-supervision to make it real and to make it function. And they tested this. Now, this was a study that was done, and I tried to find the source of it. But they talk about it in the book. And they did a study on, well, they actually did 2 studies that they called it, but they were looking at something else completely. They pulled people together, college students together, and they put them into 2 groups. And they told them that they were analyzing the difference in the texture of food. And so they wanted to know people's responses to the different things they were going to give them. So they brought two groups into the room. And one group they gave, and they just had baked these chocolate chip cookies. So the whole place smelled like chocolate chip cookies. And they asked the participants in the study to please not eat before they came for at least 3 hours, so that they came to study a little bit hungry. So they did. They came in, and here is here's the rub. In front of one of the groups, they put a bowl of warm chocolate chip cookies and some chocolates. And then in front of the other group, they put a bowl filled with several different kinds of radishes. And they said, we want to talk about the difference in texture. And they were looking at a food study that wanted to examine the difference in texture. So they put these folks in the room for a period of time, and they said, now you got to just eat what's assigned to you. You chocolate chip cookies, you can't have radishes, and you radish people, you can't have cookies. And they put them in the room, and they left them alone for a period of time. And of course, there was great enthusiasm around the cookies, and there was kind of like resignation associated around the radishes. But you know what? Everybody followed the rules. Even though the radishes were kind of coveting the cookies, nobody ate the radishes. They did what they were told to do. They managed their desires. And of course, the cookie eaters didn't have a whole lot of desire to eat the radishes, so it wasn't a problem for them. What the radish eaters were actually using in that moment was willpower. Because the elephant is going inside, oh, come on, those cookies smell good. Go get a cookie. Who cares if you follow the rules? The rider is saying, look, you're in a study. You've agreed to do this. You need to manage yourself and, just eat the radishes and do what you're supposed to do. So they went through the whole process, and they talked to them. And then in the middle of the experiment, they kind of changed the experiment. And they said, well, we have you here, and we're excited that we have you here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little study on complex problem solving. And what we're going to do is we're going to both of your groups, we're going to give you the same problem. It's a complex problem. We're going to give you lots of paper. It was about tracing a complex figure. And actually, the task that they had given everybody was impossible to solve. There was no solution. But they wanted to see basically how long each group would work on solving the problem. And they put it in the context of, you're college students, and we're comparing this to high school students, and we want to see how much energy and effort and time you spend in solving this problem. And so they put it in front of both the groups, the radish group and the cookie group, and they gave them the problems, and they set them off to work in a period of time again. What was fascinating in this was that the ones who had eaten the cookies and had not had to implement any kind of self-control in the previous meeting, they did much better. They finally, figured out that it wasn't solvable, but the cookie people had made 19 tries. They spent 19 minutes making 34 tries before they realized that there was no way to solve it. In the same time frame, the radish people, they only worked 8 minutes and had 19 attempts before they gave up. And so you're saying to me, well, Deborah, why are you telling me this? Well, the researchers did this over and over again, and what they believe is the reason that the radish people didn't do well in the second experiment was they didn't have any self-control left. They didn't have the willpower to make themselves work on that problem with energy until they solved it. Whereas the people who were in the cookie side of the experience had not been tested. Their willpower was fresh, it hadn't been used, it was ready to be used, and it allowed for a longer engagement in the problem. Once again, I think it's an interesting setup, and they did it over and over again, and they found it to be consistently true. Because willpower is being used by the radish people, they learned that willpower it's an exhaustible resource. We just can't use willpower constantly. If we're trying to willpower and trying to make the writer do what the writer needs to do, and we're just doing it over and over and over again, we lose our energy to continue when it's just the writer and when the willpower isn't enough to keep us on the track. That's critically important, and we get tired. And when you get tired of self-supervision, you just stop doing it. It's not that you don't care. It's not that you're lazy. It's just you're tired. You're tired of making the effort. And it's at this point that you must appeal to the elephant. You got to break through to the feeling. You got to fire up the elephants to create movement forward. Elephant energy is required for success. Now, it's ironic, and you can certainly see why. It's the elephant that usually makes things fail, because the elephant rebels and doesn't want to do it. In order for the writer to succeed, there must be elephant buy-in. But of course, we know in order for elephant buy-in to work, the writer has to have done their job. So the elephant energy is required. And again, the lack of it is usually for favor. And I want to share a very specific example with you. It's called the glove shrine. Now, this is out of The Heart of Change by Cotter and Cohen, and it was quoted by this man in his experience. And he shared this example. He was an executive officer at a company that used a lot of gloves, all different kinds of work gloves. And he was challenging people. He was in the financial area of the company, and he was looking at how much money was being spent on all different kinds of gloves. There was no consistency. Nobody was using the same system. There was no organized ordering. It was random ordering by each division. And it was many, many gloves being purchased. And he spoke about it, and he presented about it, and he talked about it. And you know what? Nobody listened. Nobody seemed to care. He was working with a graduate student, and he said, I've presented all of the logical reasons, all of the writer reasons why we should take action on this, but nobody's bought in. Nobody cares. So what he did was he had his grad student gather one of the gloves used in every division, all the divisions in the company. And he had the grad student tag every glove with the cost of that glove. And he put together all of these gloves, and he stacked them on in an executive boardroom on the executive board table. And he stacked it, and the glove shrine was a huge mountain of gloves. And in those gloves, there were the same gloves ranging in price from $3.22 to $10.55. There were all different kinds of gloves ranging in prices. And he'd been telling them this rationally, but nobody would listen. So he made this huge mountain of gloves, called all the division presidents in to this meeting, and he didn't say anything. He just had them walk into the room without an explanation. Of course, you might imagine why people were going, wow, well, what is this? And then he said, well, this is all we buy, and these are the prices we use, and this is basically why we're losing so much money in this area. And it was in that moment that the elephant stepped up. They had to have something really hit them in the part of them where it's like, whoa, are we really doing this? I mean, are we really making these kinds of mistakes? Well, we have to change that. And even though the writer had presented all of that with writer clarity, until the elephant jumped in and reacted to the shrine and how wasteful that was, no action was ever taken. So it's a fascinating thing that for the writer to move forward, the elephant has to engage, and we've got to get the elephant in the process. Surprises about change, number 3, we look at resistance. What looks like resistance is often lack of clarity. And I think we can all really relate to that. One of the biggest ways to empower motivation is simple clarity. Sometimes we don't move on things simply because it's not clear. We're not sure what to do. And I can kind of look at us here at Compass, and we had these employment, improvement plans. And we launched this whole thing last year, but there was ambiguity about how to implement it. How do we do it? How are we going to teach people to use it? And the writer is trying to make sense of it. And when the writer can't make sense of it, what happens? The elephant sits down. And the elephant sat down and said, this is making sense to me. I don't see how it applies to me. I'm really confused and misunderstanding all of this stuff. So you know what? I'm just not going to do it. Or I'm going to make a half effort at it just to fill whatever is required of me. But, I don't get it. I don't buy in. Clarity on how to do it, how to implement, how to go about things would be so helpful in any kind of change movement. So if we're going to change this process, we've got to be clear about what we want and how we're going to implement it. I remember I've quoted Brene Brown before. Brene Brown says, clarity is kind, clarity is fair. Clarity makes life a lot easier to live. And we as leaders, whether we're leading just ourselves or we're leading a team, it's our responsibility to make things clear. In the most recent change research, because all change shares similar characteristics, what has been developed is a 3-part framework for change that is possible to make change work more effectively. And it's a guide to how to change our behavior in order that we can effectively implement the change. So the proven formula has 3 parts. The first is direct the writer. If you want the writer to implement change, you gotta show the writer what's working. And these are find the bright spots. And I noticed that LCC sends us bright spots things, and they look for the bright spots. This is out of the literature that says when you want people to change, spotlight what's going well, gather what's working well and the positive experiences that you have because it's working, show how it's working, and show how we can do it better. So in the employment engagement and employment improvement plan, some departments it's working really well. Well, let's look at what they did. How did it work, and how was it effective, and how was it implemented? And let's take that information and help others understand it so everybody can learn from that experience. We have to manage the predilection for the negative. I've been talking all year, this predilection for the negative and what it does to our lives and how we just tend to see the negative. It's a human survival mechanism. We learn more from the negative. We gain more from our negative knowledge. The negative is a kind of a predisposition over everything that we do. We know that we can change that. We've looked at the happiness advantage. We know we can put that lens on. And when our perception of a situation changes, it changes our experience of that situation. But it's a constant struggle. It's a constant battle to avoid this predilection that we have for the negative as human beings. Yes, it has helped us survive, and there's still a place for it. But in the day-to-day operations of our lives, it can overwhelm us and stop us in our tracks. We have to evaluate problem focus for the writer. The writer is trying to make a plan for where we need to go. We have to be very clear about where we want to go. That's that clarity issue again. And then once we have a direction, we know where we're going, provide crystal clear direction. Because if I don't clearly understand what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know how to move forward because of lack of clarity, there's a really good chance my elephant's going to sit down because I don't understand. I don't know what to do, and I can't get into it. And so The self-supervision stops, my willpower stops working, and I just don't know how to move forward. So we don't, we just stop where we are. So directing the rider in these areas, really critical. We got to motivate the elephant. Now, remember I said what looks like laziness can be exhaustion. We've just tried to use our willpower so much to make things different, and it doesn't work, and we run out of that resource. And the rider can't get his way by force for long. The rider can be up there with a whip and cracking the whip and have the reins and be slapping on the elephant. But the truth of it is, when the elephant sits down, moving forward has stopped because the rider cannot get the elephant up. And we got to remember that fatigue of self-supervision when we're trying to make ourselves do it by managing all the things like they did in the cookies. The radish eaters managed their desire to do something different, and it impacted them in the next activity because self-supervision is an exhaustible resource. And we have to engage people's emotional side. It's critical for success. Not only do we give a plan, but we have to get people to buy into that plan. And it's the elephants among us who do that, get people excited, enthusiastic, and wanting to move forward. And then the other really big one is shape the path. What can look like a people problem is often a situation problem. That whole popcorn thing about how much popcorn you eat, it's the bucket that shapes the response. How can we find those similar things in the things that we want to change? So it's the situation plus the surrounding environment that equals the path. So where are we going? And what is the environment like? How do we, in the environment around us, facilitate the change by creating an optimistic, positive circumstance in which the change can implement and move forward? Because when you shape the path, you make change more likely. And no matter what's happening with the rider and the elephant, and sometimes shaping the path is simply saying to people who are following you, I don't know exactly what the path is yet. I know we have these big problems. We don't know exactly what the path is. Work with us while we create it. Sometimes shaping the path is saying that you don't have one, but have people hang on and work with you to create one. So the combination of these things together makes for the implementation of really positive change. Now, this framework is based upon decades of scientific research. Chip and Dan Heath have pulled it together in this one book, but there's supporting data and literature all around it. I really encourage you to read it. Fascinating stuff, and it certainly does apply to all of us every day in our life. And it's a simple framework to remember. I think it's flexible enough to be used in many situations, professional and personal. Even if the change is imposed upon us, we can still use this. Leaders can help us use this. And if we are the change maker, we're implementing the change, it certainly is possible for us to use this. And if you are interested in more specific examples about it, and there are fascinating examples, pick up the book, Switch, because it'll give you very real life situations for how to implement this framework. So again, in summary, to change behavior successfully, you have to do three things. You have to direct the rider. We have to have the plan. We have to have the direction we're going. We have to have that vision. Then you got to motivate the elephant, because a vision is nothing on paper. It's the people behind. It's the enthusiasm. It's the desire to make the vision real. And that's the elephant in any situation. And then shape the path so that we know where we're going, that we have direction, and we know that if we follow this path, we're going to get there. It may need to be reshaped. It may need to be tweaked. The path isn't always the same, but as we constantly work to shape the path, we create the possibility for the movement forward. And doing all three at once means dramatic change can happen. Even when, there aren't a lot of other resources available to you, it's just you and your mindset and how you approach the situation. This can absolutely result in your achieving change that you really never thought you might be able to, if you can approach it with this three-part framework. So the truth is always, we create our world through our perception of it. I believe that with all my heart. If we're in a change, it's about you and what you choose to do. So in the change process, we can say, well, I have no control, and your elephant can sit down. Or you can participate in the change process and help the rider, and then have your elephant move, that drive for change forward in your lives. It's all about what we choose to do. I think this research is fascinating. I hope it's been interesting and new to you. I really encourage you to continue reading about it. There are so many great examples and so many insights that we can certainly all apply to our lives in general. So I have one last activity for you. And I want you to think about how to use this framework in your own lives. So our final activity, it's a thought-provoking activity for you today. Before you leave this session, I'd like you to think about what you've learned today and think about something you want to change, something specific. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's in your personal life. Identify the specific steps you can take in your world, whether it's a personal or professional change, that will help you implement the three-part change framework. So the questions you want to ask yourselves are, how do I direct the rider? How do I motivate the elephant? And how do I shape the path? And if you can think about that strategy and the change you want to make, it's possible for you to really do remarkable change efforts in your own life, organizationally and personally. So what Casey and I were talking about was, let's plan to share. Take your choice for change. Think through this process, how you can do these things. It might be for work, it might be for you personally. But in one of the upcoming team meetings, we're going to ask our directors to help people share the strategy in a meeting. And they'll give you instructions, they'll provide guidance for you, how we want to do this. But we want to bring it down to our real lives and see how we might be able to implement in the day-to-day reality of what we all do. So I hope you've all, as I said, enjoyed this. You've learned something from it. Take some time for reflection. This is, as I said, our last professional learning session for this school year. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to a brand new program next year. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful day.